Hello and welcome to eNow Software and Global Knowledge's Top 10 Tips for Supporting and Troubleshooting Lync 2013 webinar, presented by MCT and President of LITSG LLC, Richard Luckett. We will begin with a brief word from CEO and technical founder of eNow Software, Jay Gundotra.
Thank you very much for joining us today. This is the first webinar of a new technical series that was recently launched. Follow us on Twitter at eNow Consulting to learn about future webinars. Lync Server is one of Microsoft's fastest growing products. It is also one of the most difficult technologies to troubleshoot due to its dependency upon your networking, SQL, and telco teams. We hope that you find today's content not only informative, but that you walk away with some practical tips that will make your job of supporting Lync Server easier. I'm happy to introduce my good friend, Rich Luckett. Rich has been working with Lync Server products since Microsoft introduced Exchange 2000 Conferencing Server and subsequently LCS, OCS, and now Lync. So Rich, what are your top 10 tips for troubleshooting Lync?
Hi Jay, thank you. Appreciate being invited to speak today. Before I jump into the tips, I thought I'd let everybody know a little bit about myself. I am an instructor and consultant and been doing that for over 15 years. I've had a wealth of knowledge with both Exchange and Lync Server and the integration of the two. And most recently, I've worked with Microsoft on developing a Lync Server 2013 Depth Support Engineer course, which delves deeply into the troubleshooting of the product. And hopefully, you'll see as we go through this session today that I bring out wealth of knowledge, and hopefully you'll be able to take some pieces of that with you that are practical that you can use back at work today. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of what this session covers, this is a top 10 tips list. We're going to do it in the form of a countdown. So I'm going to start with tip number 10 and work our way to tip number 1. But along the way, I've broken these tips into 3 kind of general categories, starting with tips that pertain to planning, and then some tips that are specifically pertaining to Lync administration, and finally some troubleshooting tips. To get us going, I thought I'd start us off with a little bit of a famous quote. If you've been working with Lync for any amount of time or pretty much any IT product, you may find that this particular quote holds itself pretty true, rings true, and that is that if you're really preparing to deploy Lync and you do the things that are necessary, then you have a higher likelihood of success. But if you completely don't prepare, then you're highly likely to run into some of the pitfalls that could ultimately lead to failure of the deployment. Of course, if you're new to Lync, this may be terribly overwhelming, and so the feeling might be a little bit more stronger in terms of intimidation factor. If you're coming from a purely kind of Microsoft background or a purely telco background and you find yourself working with the Lync product, you'll probably feel like you're lacking on one side or the other, because it really is a product that drives knowledge of both of those skill sets if you're going to be administering it successfully. So I put another quote in here that may resound with those that are kind of new to the Lync environment and maybe a little bit overwhelmed. You might see it as the potential for many terrible things coming your way. So I love this quote from Qui-Gon Jinn. If you're a Star Wars fan as well, you might recall this as well. So the takeaway here is, even though it might seem like it's overwhelming, is that with proper preparation and with understanding of the tools that are available for you to help you, it make your life a whole lot easier. To kind of help you along this route here, we want to help you understand what it is that's available from Microsoft. I'm going to start with tip number 10 here. You can jumpstart your entire deployment and planning process by leveraging the right tool, specifically the Lync 2013 planning tool. This tool really is a kind of all-in-one tool for planning. It allows us to quickly, rapidly assess the situation that we're walking into, whether it's in an environment that we've inherited or it's a brand new deployment that we're working on. And so, as you can see in the first little graphic I've put up here, segment of this tool, one of the key things it helps us do is identify the various workloads that we're going to be leveraging with the tool. So whether first-time deployments or existing deployments, we can kind of go through here and assess what either exists or what we plan to deploy. And by doing so, the tool will help us calculate a logical design and also make recommendations on hardware and software that we're going to need to actually succeed in this deployment. So we can model out the environment and conceptualize the design. In addition to that, we can easily convert this conceptual design into a shared vision for an organization. One of the things I find is commonly understandable, universally understandable across all the different stakeholders in a deployment is a graphical representation of the environment. And so the planning tool can also prevent this in the form of something that actually shows the servers that are going to be required, how they interact with other server roles for Lync, and the dependencies that they have with external infrastructure, such as Active Directory and some SharePoint components and Exchange components and the telco components, the gateways and PSTN connectivity. Even from a firewall security perspective, what the dependencies are going to be there. So this is a great way to get everybody on the same page in terms of a shared vision for the deployment. And ultimately, one of the greatest things this tool does is it helps you streamline the actual deployment process. A lot of times we do great design work, but that doesn't translate great into marching orders for how to actually deploy the product. And so what I look at in this tool is being a value added, the actual reports that are generated. So as I get into the server admin reports, I have a summary report, certificate reports, firewall report, and a DNS report, and that's just under the Edge admin report, that we can actually leverage. We can print these out. We can export information to Visio. A lot of this information looks really well in an Excel export. And what's great about the particular report that I have up here, if you're working with the firewall administrator, security admin in your organization, trying to explain to them, these are the port requirements, that is one of the more difficult conversations to have because there are several requirements. But you have it really laid out very nicely here. As nice as any documentation you'll find in TechNet on this topic, and it also includes what I like, the source IP, source port, destination IP, and destination port, which is really what the firewall admin needs in order to create the appropriate rules. Many times the documentation simply alludes to a port and a direction, but doesn't really explain that the source port and destination port can actually be different. So this is just an example of something the planning tool can do for you, and then I hope that you take advantage of this. In our next tip, tip number 9, we really get into the next step after we get through the planning tool, which is to start leveraging another tool called Topology Builder. With the Topology Builder, you have something rather unique to Lync, which is you have the ability to configure what you're going to deploy before you deploy it. In other products, for Microsoft, we tend to deploy and then configure after the fact, or we configure while we're in that process of deployment. So this topology build really turns that paradigm upside down. So one of the things that's nice is you can have all that pre-configured and you can publish it to your central management database, CMS. We refer to it often. And then the servers, when you deploy them, just simply go and reference their configuration in that topology. But the downside potentially is that when I get into Topology Builder, especially the first time, I might have this impulse to kind of go and configure everything all at once. I've got the planning tool done, I've seen the whole logical design, and I want to implement everything all at once. And this is really kind of gets unwieldy, so to speak, because you start configuring things that you really don't have any intention of deploying right away, which can lead to other problems in terms of troubleshooting and management. So to tame the Topology Builder, what I suggest is that you only deploy or only configure what you need when you need it. Now it sounds very simplistic, but let's put this into some perspective. If you know what you're deploying right now is just a trial, then you only need to configure the elements for trialing the product. Maybe you only want to test out IAM and presence, and that's pretty much your only expectation right away. But if you keep the future in mind, you can actually configure this in such a way where it naturally leads from the trial to a pilot and maybe even to production without too much additional work. So along with keeping it to kind of simple, right, using that KISS principle, keep it simple, we also keep in mind, a little bit in the future, right? The immediate future. So if I know I'm going to be doing a trial or pilot today, and I could deploy standard edition, but I know in my production I'm going to need high availability at some point down the road, it might be better to to actually configure this to do a single server in a pool. And then, it gives me the ability to do the proof of concept and test things out, and then come back and add servers to the pool for higher availability. If I do a standard edition, I'm adding some additional work to me down the road because I'm potentially going to have to deploy a pool and migrate the CMS from one server to the pool, from the standard edition over to the pool, and just create some additional work for me. And a lot of people don't kind of see that, can't look in the crystal ball and see that. So that's my tip to you, is just to keep that immediate future in mind and design your trials and pilots accordingly. Also, I want to point out that if you kind of approach the topology builder and deployment of Lync as a cyclical process, then it helps you understand how to use the tool better. In other words, it's not a linear going from point A to point B all the time. It's going from point A to point B, maybe to C, and then coming all the way back around to A again and rehashing it and rolling through it in a cyclical process. Great illustration of this is a best practice from Microsoft, which says, hey, when you're deploying Lync, deploy your internal services first, test them out. Once you've validated all that works, come back and deploy, like edge services, and the next thing that you want to do. And by doing so, you can kind of confirm, the scope of issues. If you run into any problems during deployment, you can kind of narrow it down to, hey, okay, that's just an internal issue. Do everything at once, and you got more troubleshooting to figure out any kind of deployment issues. So cyclical, not linear. Kind of keep that in mind. Now, the next tip I have for you is a little bit different, a tangent, but it is still part of deployment. Tip number 8 is really about thinking ahead of time about how you're going to do administration right off the bat. So as you're going into your deployment process, start incorporating the concepts of delegation right away. Microsoft has pre-built many different custom roles that allow us to delegate administration, even to what you might consider a non-traditional administrative role. For example, you might want to give some administrative rights to the HR department to see into some of the properties or configure some of the properties of your Lync users. Or you might want to give rights to the legal department to do some discovery functionalities. So, and you might want to delegate down to different organizational units, different business departments within an organization for things like response group administration or chat administration. So these are things that are kind of pre-built. Now the scopes tend to be global. That is, if I add somebody to one of these default groups, they can administer throughout the organization, they have administrative rights throughout the organization. One of the things, even in the previous version of Lync, I could do with these is sort of customize them to where I could limit the scope, which is I could say, okay, I'll give you rights to be a sys help desk admin, but I'm going to limit you to the marketing department OU. And so I could do that in 2010. In 2013, we have much more granular capabilities when we create these custom roles and custom scopes. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that in just a moment. But before I do, one of the other things you might see with groups is that as you do administrative tasks, many times you need to confirm that somebody actually has the rights to perform a task. For example, you're troubleshooting, you go into TechNet and you find an article and it says, okay, to do this task you have to have these administrative rights, and then it gives you a script that recommends that you compare your particular user's rights to see if it's a member of a particular role group, or you search to see if they have access to a commandlet. And so a lot of the documentation online now starts to include this evaluation of permissions as part of this. And that just kind of as a background on how this is all possible, this is really a derivative of PowerShell functionality. We have in PowerShell individual commandlets. The commandlets have their own unique access control lists and entries. And what we're doing with these custom roles is we're aggregating together groups of commandlets that represent, somebody's job responsibilities and giving them permissions. So to illustrate this a little bit here, I've kind of taken some screenshots of some particular commandlets the get CS admin role dash identity, and then specifying any of those pre-built groups, piping that to format list will actually show us the identity and the commandlets, but it doesn't actually expand all the commandlets out. It's sort of a truncated value when we do format list. So if you want to actually, before I go down to that, the configure scopes is actually set to my site RGS manager for this particular commandlet and global. Like I said, the typical user scope is global with all these built-in roles. If you want to see every commandlet that a particular group would have the ability to utilize, you can actually run the following commandlet. When you pipeline it out, instead of pipelining it to just format list, pipeline it to a select command with the expand properties value commandlets. And in this case, I did an additional format so we could show it all on one screen here, pretty easy. But that last part of this isn't mandatory. The main thing is you have the ability to see all these commandlets. So I kind of picked a group that's new in 2013, the CS Response Group Managers, but there's a lot of these groups you can go and take a look at here. And why is this important? Because these become templates for us to create our own custom roles. And so that's really what I want to show you here. So if you want to create a custom role and define a unique scope, it's a very simplistic process. You're going to pick a particular role group that is a template for you. In this case, I'm using the CS Help Desk as a template. So I do a new CS admin role, specify the name of the role I want to create. In this case, I just came up with sales admins. The template is specifying the specific built-in group I want to use. The dash user scopes is where I get to do some customization here. So using the distinguished name of the sales OU for my organization, I can actually narrow down the scope here, eliminate kind of the global piece there by specifying the user scopes as being only that OU. And so that is how we do basic customization for a particular role. The most common thing we do is narrow it down by the scope and containment within AD of the objects. All right, so as a transition here to our next grouping of tips, I thought something might represent administration, and I think we probably, if you're a Star Trek fan, you probably kind of have memorized this particular exchange, and I think many of us might actually feel very much like Scotty when it comes to our administration of our Lync environment. You know, we're doing everything we possibly can to make this environment solid, to administer it the best of our ability, and yet management and peers within our teams are asking us, you know, what can we do better? What can we do more? We've still got some issues, you know. And so what I want to do in the next set of tips is help you out by giving you some tips that I think will make you a stronger administrator of your Lync environment. The first of these tips is really around this idea of having the appropriate tools to do the right job. If you've kind of a mechanic at heart or any kind of technical kind of position at heart, you probably have some motto in terms of having the right tool for the right job, right? So what I want to do is kind of show you here how you can build not just a toolkit, but a tool chest of Lync tools. There, you know, more than many products I've worked with from Microsoft, Lync has just this variety of tools that are available for us to use. Many of the tools are kind of built in, but there's so many other tools that we could reach out, download, and leverage as well. So I want to expose you to a lot of these and encourage you to kind of continue to build a Lync tool chest that you can use to further your administrative abilities. Let's start with the basics, out of the box type of stuff. So we've already mentioned a couple, right? The topology builder and the planning tool, which we talked about just earlier. But also, when you install the tools for Lync Server as part of the deployment process, you will have to invoke something called the deployment wizard just to install these tools. So the deployment wizard is something that we can leverage not just for the installation of the product, but it's how we can install tools on a machine, and we can also use it for troubleshooting purposes. One of the more common things we get in Deployment Wizard to help us with is for the troubleshooting of certificates and the renewing of certificates and the obtaining of certificates, because these are things that over a period of time will expire and we'll have to deal with. And so just from that sense, they're powerful, but they can also be used in any time there's a topology change in the environment. We're usually required to go and rerun the Deployment Wizard or Bootstrapper, right, as part of the update so that we can get the latest components either added or removed from a particular server in an organization. Also, within the tools that we have available here, the Lync Server Management Shell represents 100% of everything we can do administratively, kind of built into the product. And as you master those skill sets of working from the shell, you'll become more adept at doing those things. There's a subset of what we could do from the shell available in the Lync Server Control Panel, which is a primary graphical administrative tool. A lot of the policy that we set up would be managed from Control Panel as well. But there's a whole slew of additional tools that we can leverage outside of the box, and that is we can I specifically put a link in here. Microsoft's aggregated a number of the tools for Lync together at the URL that I provided here, which includes the ability to download the best practice analyzer, debugging tools, which is many tools grouped together, including Snooper that we're going to need to use for some of the tracing and things of that nature. Resource kit tools, again, another volume of tools that we can leverage and add to our tool chest. And for planning and performance and benchmarking, we got stress and performance tools we can download. This is just some highlights of what you have here. When you do go to this link, you can filter on a number of things. There's a lot of downloads you can get from here, but you can actually say, look, I just want to see the tools that are available for download, and you'll see a long list, and you can basically build your toolkit on a machine just by clicking on each of those and downloading them straight to the machine. In addition to that, I want to focus on one particular in the resource kit. This is actually, I put a link in here for the documentation on the resource kit, so you can kind of see brief descriptions of everything here. But these tools are very specific. They have a very specific function to them. So if you're going to increase your capabilities as administrator, understanding what each of these tools is, what they can be used for, and when would be an appropriate time to use them is going to help you tremendously. Reach out and grab that right tool for the right job. And I'm just going to pick a couple of them here, the ABS config and the SCFA util as examples of this. But all these are relevant, and I would encourage you to go check them out. In this slide here, on the left side, you see a graphic representation of the ABS configuration tool. On the right side, some examples for SCAF util. Now, the idea behind the ABS config tool is to make our life a little easier when we're trying to configure the address book configuration. So it's a flat text file that I would normally have to configure to set up the regular expressions for doing pattern matching and pull information out of AD that's going to be listed into the Lync address book. Configuring that text file can be really confusing if it's the first time you've ever done it, and so this tool makes it a little easier to actually figure out what it is that I want included, I want to search for, I want to match for, and want to incorporate into that address book for Lync. So this is something I think, right as you first deploy Lync into an environment, when we see results in the address book that are unexpected or kind of behavior that are unexpected from looking people up in the address book, this might be a tool that can help you out. From another aspect, as administrators, one of the struggles we find is that sometimes we need to do administrative tasks either in mass or even in a one-off scenario, but it would require us to go to an end user's machine and actually walk them through configuring it manually. The secondary feature utility allows us to actually make those changes that would normally be done from an end user perspective in a Lync client on an as-needed basis for people that may be out of the office or maybe have left the company, and we just need to make some changes to their settings. And so just a couple of examples here. In the first one, got this account Richard, and we've turned on simultaneous, we've turned off simultaneous ring enabled, right, is set to false. We disabled that. We've configured the ring time for 20 seconds, and the action to take when there's a ring no answer for a call coming into this individual. In the second example here, variation on the theme, UM is enabled, SimulRing is disabled, but instead of forcing it to go to voicemail, we want it to forward to a separate SIP URI. So instead of actually having to walk a user through configuring it, this gives me the ability from a central location to actually make this configuration change. When I'm building a tool chest, a lot of times, you know, there's this really tools that you just come to use over and over again, right? And some of them are highly specialized. In the case of Lync tools, some of those tools are not necessarily even coming from Microsoft. Instead, they might come from the community at large. You'll find a lot of scripts, a lot of prescriptive guidance in the community. There are Lync masters and Lync MVPs and other people that contribute in the community that have special skills. In my consulting career, there's a couple that I use on a regular basis that I've been terribly impressed that they're not only providing advice and guidance, but they've gone to the extent of literally building tools that you can put in your tool chest. And so a couple listed here, James Cousin has a website called My Lync Lab. He's built several tools. A lot of tools are built off of even some of the things that are built into the tools, right? Like Lync 2013 has the centralized logging service, but he built a graphical tool around this to help manage that process that can be quite intimidating and confusing for people that are trying to figure this out. And so this is a kind of slick tool that takes kind of the guesswork out of this. For managing your SQL mirrors, got a great little tool to help us understand the state of the mirror and what's the primary and what's the secondary and what the failover state is for a mirror, and helping manage that process. And also the newest one that I've just kind of really got a kick out of is this Edge suite, which is a Lync Edge port testing tool. One of the toughest things to do when troubleshooting and when deploying the Edge services, and people are really intimidated by this process and trying to get it to work. And it's a tool here that can make life so much easier in testing this out. So, and then if you're doing a lot of enterprise voice work, and you're kind of a strong Microsoft person but new to the telco side, the concept of creating dial plans could just be really something you struggle with. So Ken's built a tool here called the Dialing Rule Optimizer, and is not so recent, but a while back changed the URL to linkoptimizer.com, so you can go straight to this URL and start to populate this, and within a matter of minutes you can actually have several scripts built that will actually create the dial plans for you based off of your actual range of numbers that you have, your DIDs or extensions that you're using in your organization. So powerful tools, highly recommend it. And I also want to point out, you know, that there's a lot more MVPs, a lot more guidance, a lot more tools. These are just a couple. And so I'm really happy actually working with eNow, just kind of point out that they've really fostered the MVP community and brought a lot of MVPs into the development of their own product. And so I've really been impressed with that from them. Ultimately, if you're going to be a strong administrator in Lync, you're going to have to learn the language of Lync admins. And if I was going to be an Exchange administrator, I would need to learn the email language, which would be SMTP, right? So if I'm going to be a Lync administrator and I want to be solid on Lync, I need to learn SIP. SIP is literally used for all the communications that take place with our Lync clients and servers. And so we want to make sure that we understand this language. Now, I don't have time to do a full dissertation or primer on this, but I'm going to give you some basics here just to get you started. If you're brand new to Lync and you haven't really delved into the SIP language, the first thing you understand is SIP is designed so that it would actually create, modify, and tear down all communications taking place. This is its job in a real-time communication type of situation. And so SIP gives us the ability to send signaling around between what are called user agents and allow them to actually establish communications with one another. So we have a request response language with SIP that starts with the user agent sending out a request, and it will expect a response back. Now, the responses come in 6 tiers of categories here, from provisional to various failure levels. Just by knowing there's those 6 levels, you can actually learn a lot about what's happening when you're troubleshooting, diagnosing communication issues in Lync. When you see a 100 or 101 or 102, 103, all the way up to 199, you know that that's something to deal with the provisional state of getting communications going. Where a 200 level response means, hey, I got a response back, and whatever I did, it was successful, right? But if I get to the 400, 500, 600, something's gone wrong, and I know I'm going to need to diagnose those issues with that. And so those are pretty easy things to remember about the SIP language. And of course, you can become more familiar with the different types of requests that take place as well. In the next illustration here, just to kind of carry on this theme, if you were to look at the SIP RFCs and the standards, you would find this is an open standard. Microsoft's incorporated it, and it's not proprietary that Microsoft came up with. But there are some applications of SIP towards the Lync roles and the Lync clients and how they utilize it. So in this illustration here, you can think of the user's 1 soft phone as a Lync client. And user 2 SIP phone could be a Lync device or something of that nature. So these 2 end users, soft phone, SIP phone, they would register with their registrars or SIP registrars. In Lync world terminology, a registrar is typically a standard edition server or a front-end pool, but could also be something at the branch site level, and potentially a gateway that some device is registering on. But that also forms another portion of the topology in the SIP topology, which is the registrars tend to be SIP proxies as well and can proxy communication. So each of these vertical bars that you see in this illustration here represents some leg in the communication that's taking place. So notice here they're labeled M1 through M14. That's showing you each message in its sequence here. So just to walk through this communication process, you've got a user agent, I think it was a Lync client, and they send an invitation. That's the invite, is the actual message request they're sending to their proxy server, to their home server. This proxy server looks up where the target user is at and determines that they're registered on a separate proxy server. So they relay that invite, they send the invite onto that other proxy server. At that point, that first user's proxy server sends back a message saying, a 100 provisional message saying, look, I'm trying to make this call. And then once the invite is relayed to the actual second user by the second proxy, then that 100 message is sent back to the actual first user's proxy server. So you can kind of see the sequence happening here. Now, once the actual provisional process starts to ring that endpoint, then a ringing status is sent back, response is sent back, and that's relayed back to the original sender in sequence. Then when somebody picks up, then we get an OK response back. And once the originator acknowledges that the other end is picked up, then there's a media establishment that takes place. So in these invites, in the communications that take place, information about how to set up an actual real-time media session exists. Ultimately, when somebody hangs up on one end or the other, in this illustration, user 2 hangs up, then a bye message is sent and a 200 OK response comes back. So all of this is being done from a signaling standpoint using SIP, and that's why it's so important to us to understand what this is, what it is and how it works. Now, if you want to take this to the next level, a couple of recommendations. There are dedicated classes. For example, one of our sponsors, Global Knowledge, offers a course called Introduction to SIP, and they also offer the new Lync 2013 Desktop Support Engineer course that I mentioned that I was involved with. That's being offered there as well. And we do a lot of in-depth tracing of SIP communications, specifically around troubleshooting Lync. Also, if you're interested, there is a SIP school where you can actually go to become SIP certified. So carrying on with our theme here, you could become a SIP Lord and become a Jedi Knight in the SIP language. And trust me, this is something that you'll be the envy of a lot of people in the Lync realm, because as soon as you kind of master SIP, you'll basically be a go-to person when it comes to troubleshooting any kind of issues with the communications taking place in your environment. Our next tip number 5, is really an encouragement to, I know it's kind of funny here to get loopy, but it's really encouragement to leverage your skills, advance your skills from a PowerShell perspective. A lot of times we're doing PowerShell and we're doing advanced techniques and we don't kind of appreciate what we're doing. For example, we use the get command, any kind of command that starts with the verb get, followed by some other noun like CS user, and we can enumerate through a lot of objects all at once, report back on a lot of objects. If we add a pipeline in there and pipe those results to another commandlet, we're actually doing a small loop. We're actually kind of going through, and for each object that we kind of have there, we create this array of information, and then we send it over to another commandlet, and it parses as one item at a time. In this case, measure object, pretty innocuous. It basically counts each item in the array and says there's 79 of them, right? But nothing else takes place there. But make a small modification to this, and we can see we can make a tremendous effect in an environment with very little effort. If we do get CS user, pipe it to set CS user, we've initiated what I call one of the power couples in PowerShell, which is you combine a get command and a set command, and you can make modifications to a lot of objects very quickly. In this illustration here, we've added the parameter enterprise voice enabled and set it to false. So if I press enter here at this point in time, all 79 of those users in this organization are going to have their enterprise voice functionality disabled, turned off. It may not be highly desirable. All right, so even without knowing it, we're probably doing some looping without getting deep into it. If you want to learn more about loops, you can actually, there's some free resources. I put one in here from Tobias Weltner, who has a free ebook that you can actually go and see online. And it is a great tutorial from PowerShell perspective. Also, Microsoft has a course, the 10.961 course, that you can take. And this class is sort of the introduction to PowerShell. Now what's great is once you learn PowerShell, skills are fully transferable to other applications, but you will have to make that leap and apply that knowledge to Lync specific commandlets. So I put a link in here for the TechNet library, which has all the Lync 2013 commandlets organized by category, which to me is better than alphabetically when I'm trying to look how to solve a problem with PowerShell. Of course, one of the hard things to do is to make that leap from just being proficient with PowerShell to actually creating your own scripts. And so when you're at that point where you've built the knowledge up of PowerShell and you've mastered some of the Lync commandlets, then you might want to look for examples so you're not reinventing the wheel. Look for PowerShell scripts that people have already created out there. Microsoft has a gallery of these types of resources. Now, there's a lot of resources that aren't necessarily PowerShell resources, but I've actually gone to the site here in this illustration, and I've filtered specifically on the Lync PowerShell resources, and note there are 55 PowerShell resources just on this site alone, and they're organized by popularity and ratings and dates. You can filter there and take a look, and maybe you might just find something you didn't know you could do before. Kind of learn a little bit about what people have automated, and you get clever enough you can even publish your ideas as resources for other administrators too. So as I transition into the next topic here, I wanted to put a quote in here from one of what I believe to be the most famous troubleshooters of all time. Of course, if you're a child of the 80s, then you probably know who MacGyver is. If you're a little younger than that, you might not know who he is. But this is a guy that basically could fix anything with a strip of duct tape and could crack any safe with the paperclip or get out any jam. So I think it's a perfect lead-in for what we're about to talk about, which is some tips on troubleshooting your Lync environments. The first one I have to bring up is that we have the ability in Lync 2013 to get into the weeds when it comes to tracing problems out. I mentioned earlier that you really need to learn the SIP language and understand it, and that's really kind of a prerequisite for being able to trace problems. But Microsoft also provides us with a logging service that makes it easier to harvest the information we need to parse from multiple server roles throughout the organization, and this is called the centralized logging service. In previous versions of Lync, we would actually leverage something called the OCS logger tool, and it's still available. There's a 2013 version of that available as part of the debugging tools you can download if you want to do one-off tracing. But this feature is built in. Every Lync role has an actual centralized logging service agent running on it. It's a service you can actually see running on the server. And if I invoke the agent with a specific scenario, it'll harvest information that could be helpful to diagnosing problems. There is a specific flow to which I go through to invoke this. I have to start the CSCLS logging, and I have to specify a specific scenario. Now, I'm not going to go into all the different scenarios, but I want to point one out in particular that I think you might want to consider in terms of enabling this, that I would encourage, and that is there is a scenario called always on, and always on does not get full verbose details on every element, but it does look for some of the most common issues, common SIP stack information that we might want to know about an environment. And when you have problems with people that have identified issues that are sort of transient, that is, they're difficult to reproduce, going in after the fact, enabling logging, and then trying to reproduce it, it may be a difficult thing to do, but if you're always logging, there's a chance you might catch that thing that's elusive to you. And that's why I think maybe enabling always on is not such a bad idea. So you'd have to start CSCLS logging, specify the scenario of always on, and specify what pools that you want to run that always on scenario on. Now you can only run one scenario at a time. So if you want to see if something's already running, you can do show-CSCLS logging, and you may have to stop a scenario before you can start another one. But that's a great way to see what's currently happening. You will have to stop the scenarios in order to sync the information from multiple servers together before you can search them. And so that's the flow: start, stop, sync, and then search. Once you initiate the search logging, it'll give you the ability to output that to a text file. You can then take that file and you can parse it with a tool like Snooper, which is what's being illustrated here as well. And one of the great new features in Snooper that I think many people appreciate and are loving about the newest version is the ability to specify the call diagrams, and which is what you see in the top right there. So just like I showed you earlier, that ladder diagram, these call diagrams show us the flow in a graphical representation that's hard to abstract just by looking at the messages in sequence. It's kind of hard to visualize, two different endpoints talking to each other and how that dialogue is taking place without this sort of call diagrams. And so the Snooper has that built in. It's a great new feature that we should take advantage of. All right. So tip number 3 is on something we refer to as, or I'm going to call, synthetic blends here, right? We have this wide variety of test commandlets. I've tried to cram them all into one screen here. I kind of crammed them in, and as you can see that there's quite a few of them. But the beauty of a test commandlet is that it gives you the ability to synthetically create a communication transaction without actually depending on an end user to do it themselves, right? Because it's kind of random behavior end users go through. But when you need to test a function out, you need to invoke that, and so these test commandlets give us that flexibility. Synthetic transactions are really just the canary in the coal mine for a Lync environment. If I can run a synthetic transaction and it can generate some results and even some diagnostics, then I might actually be able to determine there's a problem before an end user experiences a problem. And so a lot of monitoring software solutions out there leverage these heavily in order to identify any problems in an organization. It's pretty common. Systems Center, the Uniscope product from eNow, and other products will leverage these quite extensively. But when you're troubleshooting problems, you don't always have that flexibility to just run and initiate the polling process on the monitoring software. You want kind of immediate results. So one of the things you can do is, if you learn the basic syntax for this, is invoke this independently from the monitoring to help you actually validate that the change you made is actually functional. If you really get into this quite heavily, you can actually create jobs around these. That is, you can kind of build PowerShell scripts, and then you can start a job, invoke the code, and then you can schedule that to run, or you can just run the job in the background while you're doing other things, and then come back and look at the results of the job. Let's look at this basic syntax for doing this. So if you're going to run this one off, what you have to do is make sure that you have, for many of these, at least 2 accounts, sometimes maybe 3 or more accounts would be necessary, and specify what you want to try to accomplish here. In this case, I want to test basic instant messaging functionality. So I'm going to use the test CSIM. So I get the credentials of one SIP user and the credentials of a second SIP user, and these test accounts have created independently, so they're not impacting any production users. Many people actually do use production user accounts. That would be your call. In this case here, I'm not going to read the whole thing off to you, but the net result of running this synthetic transaction is that I got a successful result. If, however, I'd gotten an error, there would have been additional diagnostic information I could use to help troubleshoot the problem. So you can think of this as a really elaborate ping test for IM, where I actually validate that instant messaging is working in the environment. And this same concept can be applied to several other tests. But if I just made a change to somebody's account and want to verify that it's working, I could also do this kind of synthetic transaction. Our number 2 tip with Lync is to score Lync. As it turns out, Microsoft's put together a really wonderful resource called the Network Planning and Monitoring Troubleshooting with a Lync Server document. It's a very thick document. It's a must-read if you're trying to improve the user experience for your users, and that is really what it focuses on. All of us are familiar with the concept of performance monitoring, but this is a little different facet. What's different is key health indicators are performance metrics that specifically look at the thresholds that would indicate that users are having a bad experience. And by monitoring these thresholds can indicate to us that, hey, there's something wrong, something not quite right that we need to address, and users are impacted by it. And so it's a different mindset for doing performance monitoring. And there's complete guidance of these key health indicators and their thresholds in the documentation for the link that's provided here. So I encourage you to go check out that document. And as I said, it's a must read. Also, from an end user themselves, sometimes as end users we end up in various scenarios. We end up traveling and at a hotel or conference center and something where it has unpredictable bandwidth, and we just want to know, what's going to be the quality of the call I'm going to take. Microsoft has a free tool we can download called a pre-call diagnostics tool, and you can actually install this Windows 8 and higher. You have the Windows Store app download you can do here, which is something that you might want to take advantage of, let your users know, and it gives them great kind of feedback on what the actual diagnostics would be. So a kind of way to provision. Now Lync itself gives some in-call diagnostics, right? You've probably all seen where you've had low bandwidth and you get a warning from Lync. So this is kind of using the same metrics, but before the call takes place to give an indication of what that behavior might be like. So we can run a test, and you can go to this, you can search or download this tool, and there's some additional screenshots, additional information you can test, you can take a look at. And finally, from an administrator perspective, there's a tool that comes with this documentation that allows us to do what are called scorecards. And I want to drill down into that a little bit more. So in addition to the documentation link I just gave you, there's a specific blog about the call quality methodology scorecard, kind of a preview into this, and this is some of that information from there. In this particular slide, we see that there are 3 reports being illustrated. There's additional reports I haven't shown here, but what's great about this is it can give you an idea of how the different streams are being distributed across the network. You've got streams for the gateway, streams for wired, wireless, wireless peer-to-peer. So it's breaking it all down, and then the red areas are the actual poor streams portion of that. So it's telling you, in this case, we've got a lot of good streams that are taking place, but we have some percentage of poor streams. In the poor stream distribution, then we see that just the poor streams broken down. We can see here that wireless is kind of a leader in terms of the poor streams, which seems to correlate, right? Wireless, we can kind of expect that to possibly have poor or communications or quality. The gateway here is also pretty large, our mediation gateway. But that is just something to help us understand what's actually taking place in the environment. At the device level, which is not included in the stream distribution, we have a separate report, and here they're leveraging and telling us what the MOS score is. So the mean opinion score is designed to be an objective means of determining a user's experience. So a MOS score of 4 and higher is supposed to be good, right? And the score goes all the way up to 5. That's our rating scale. And so 3.6 is basically an adjustment for VoIP, which is kind of an interesting factor. If you go into the nuts and bolts of this, we learned that different codecs have maximum MOS scores, and so Microsoft's kind of adjusted this here in this example. Say, okay, we're really looking for 3.6 because maybe 3.9 is the max, that this particular codec can measure up to. And so here we see a distribution based on that MOS score. And what's kind of bad about this indication here is that of all the devices, what it's telling us is only 1.6% of all devices are having good streams. That is, that's pretty low, pretty bad. So that's not a good thing to see in an environment, is that low percentage of people. And so that's what's great about the tool here, is it can help you identify in reality what people's scores are. Because, when it comes down to it, it's very subjective what people say is good or bad. I can have two people sitting right next to each other, have the same device, same network, same topology, same servers, and one says they had a great experience on the call and the other says they don't. The only way you're really going to know for sure that it, objectively, is with information like this. All right, before I get into the next tip, I want to do one more quote here from one of my favorite Star Trek characters, Geordi LaForge. I mean, to me, he had it made. He had the monitoring board there, the coolest computer layout, kind of really cool stuff going on there for monitoring the enterprise. But this is something that I find to be true in the real world, which is when we're working with systems, monitoring systems, trying to make sure they stay healthy, they're not exactly most forthright when it comes to telling us what's going on that's wrong. So it becomes the onus of the administrator, you and I, to actually determine that information. So my number one tip for you is to actively monitor Lync server. And to do this, we have to understand what we can use to monitor our system. Now, Microsoft provides this information sometimes not in real time, but just after the fact. For example, when we have a call and we hang up a call, that's when that call experience information is made available for like the scorecards and tools of that nature. But what we really want to do is try and focus on some of the real-time information we can gather. Microsoft has a Lync monitoring feature which we can enable. It's no longer a dedicated server role in Lync. It's a feature on a front-end pool. So you have to use Topology Builder. You have to enable the feature on your pool in order to have the databases created. If you invoke it, you can invoke the QoE database and the CDR databases for call detail recordings, and we can have that information available from a monitoring perspective in Lync, which I want to strongly encourage you to utilize. But sometimes that doesn't give us the most real-time experience with monitoring. So I would encourage you to deploy a proactive monitoring solution. Now, Microsoft recommends that they have a System Center Operations Manager. They have a management pack for Lync 2013, but these can be very complicated products which require an entire deployment process of their own. You might actually want to leverage, for example, it's Uniscope, because it sets up really quick, really fast. You get immediate results, and and there's some business intelligence built into both the monitoring and reporting that we don't see in even the more complicated products such as System Center. So I've used this with several of my clients, and I like the immediacy of a product like this. So whatever you do, do it proactively. And if you think about it, and if we sum this all back up, go all the way back to the beginning here, the very first step in any type of planning and administration and deployment process is to actually gather information. And so the best thing you can do is to gather that on a continuous basis proactively. On that note, I really want to thank our sponsors for inviting me here today, and encourage all of you that have attended to please reach out to our sponsors. Uniscope product in particular, I just mentioned there, great at proactively monitoring and making admin's life simple, which is what we kind of hope to do with this whole presentation, right? But also great reporting and great detail into the environment. So please check out eNow and reach out to our sponsors on that. Also, I want to thank Global Knowledge. I've been an instructor with Global Knowledge for many years now as an independent, and as shameless self-promotion, I encourage you guys to take the new class that I was involved with developing, the Depth Support Engineer course. I think it's got some great value if you're going to be doing troubleshooting, and just reach out to our vendor Global Knowledge, and I know they're a wonderful training partner with Microsoft, and they have great classes. I've attended classes and taught for them, so I think they're top notch when it comes to training. And it wouldn't be right of me to not thank you all. I want to thank you for attending the session, and as a little bit of a thank you for that, I've given you some additional resources here that I think you might find valuable. The kind of note to make here is the Office blogs, all the Lync team blogs, the next hot blog has been moved to the Office blogs. And the Lync team blog is still available for archive purposes. And if you happen to have missed the Lync 2014 conference, the sessions are now available. Just a wealth of information from the product team and other partners in the Microsoft community that have brought content for that session. So thank you again, and appreciate you being here today.
For all unanswered questions in today's Q&A, please email linkquestions@enowsoftware.com, and an associate will provide you with a response shortly. That concludes today's webinar, Top 10 Tips for Supporting and Troubleshooting Lync 2013. And on behalf of Global Knowledge and eNow Software, we would like to thank you all for attending. If you'd like to contact Global Knowledge or eNow Software, please follow the links on the slide. Thank you all for attending.